Ed, good morning to Union Station.
Hi, Michael.
Yeah, it's Monday morning. We have hundreds of people already here, and we just got started. Introduce yourself and tell us what we're going to see today.
Well, my name is Ed Dickens. My team and I restored this locomotive in 2.5 years. And we're here traveling with the locomotive. There's myself and about 10 of us here worth the locomotive. But behind us are tens of thousands of men and women on the Union Pacific that were behind us to get this thing done. So we're here with the big boy. Most trained people, well, let me correct myself, all trained people know what a big boy is. But for those that don't, this is the world's largest operating steam locomotive. A really fascinating American true grit, determination story about why we would build something like this as people. Why would people design something like this? Well, the Union Pacific wasn't looking to get some type of recognition, a record book, having the world's largest locomotive. They needed it. So it was purpose-built just exactly the way it is, based on a whole series of evolutionary designs before it. And they had a problem moving traffic. They needed a bigger locomotive to get the job done, and that's what the big boy did. 7,000 horsepower locomotive, and I don't mean to exaggerate, but it really is two 844s. So for those that were here last time when we were here with the 844, this is two 844s with one big giant boiler. If you look at it, the cylinder dimensions, for all the trained people that know what I'm talking about, the cylinder is where the steam power is converted into mechanical energy. And those cylinders are just slightly smaller than what the 844 is, as there's 4 of them versus 2. Still a 300-pound pressure vessel, 300-pound boiler, 17 feet tall, 11 and a half feet wide, 135 feet long. The 844 is 115 feet long, which is a very big locomotive. So when this locomotive is traveling down the track, we tell people all the time to please stand back. We're telling that to be safe, but they're really not going to enjoy it because this locomotive is terrifying. It's designed to produce 7,000 horsepower. It doesn't do it quietly. You can feel the heat, even at 40, 50 miles an hour. You can feel the heat radiating off of this massive boiler and firebox. And the ground pounding, thumping action of 550,000 pounds of tractive force, of weight on the drivers producing that tractive force. I mean, it really is something else. We see it thousands of times a day. People smiling until we start to go by. And their eyes widen. Sometimes they'll drop their cameras, so they didn't get much of a video. I'm hoping they'll have a video channel on YouTube, the failed video attempts of being too close to the big boy, because it really is a magnificent locomotive. But it's that draw that gets people to come see it.
Now, you talked about it being purpose-built. It was never meant to be a passenger train. This was a heavy hauler. Can you give us a little bit of history there?
Well, I can tell you it's an excellent passenger locomotive. It will wheel this passenger train around. We're hauling just about 1,000 tons, which is about maybe just a little bit over 1/4 its rated capacity from Ogden, Utah to Green River. So it's not much of a train. But with a smaller diameter wheel, it was designed to pull greater power, to have greater pulling power and pull more tonnage. Whereas the 844 with those large diameter wheels is like a racehorse, like a greyhound. That locomotive was designed to run fast, to be powerful, and produce its power at a very high speed, where this locomotive will produce its power at a lower speed.
So it was meant to haul coal, is that correct?
All freight.
All
Anything.
freight.
Anything imaginable that we needed in the years leading up to and during World War II and afterwards.
Okay, sorry.
So it was a tremendous power plant. There were 25 of these. They initially built one order of 20, the 4000 to the 4019. They needed more, so they built 5 more in 1944, the 4020 to the 4024. And luckily they saved 8 of these. And this is the only one that's running, the 4014.
So the history of the 4014 then, you said there's 8 still in existence that didn't get scrapped. This is the only one running. History of this one in particular.
The history of this one, it ran a little over 1 million miles in the 17 years it was in service. And that's a lot. By today's standards, that's not very impressive. Modern locomotives, they're just much easier to maintain. Their reliability, their availability is much greater. So a modern locomotive sees a lot more mileage per month. These locomotives here, we will have about 11,000 miles on it when we're done running this year. And that's just a little under what they would have ran in 1 month when they were in service. But they also burned coal. So the coal burning big boys required just that much more servicing. These big monsters would devour 28 tons of coal in about 4 hours. Think about that logistics. If we were trying to run this thing on coal, we probably wouldn't even made it out of Wyoming yet, because the logistics are too complicated. The world today, especially the dry plains and the prairies and the mountains, imagine the fire hazard of 28 tons of coal burning over a 4-hour period. And when you watch this locomotive, look at the size of those smokestacks. It has 2 smokestacks, just like the 844. And those smokestacks are big enough that I can fit down the smokestacks with my shoulders like this. They're just huge. So you've got all that burning matter coming out of the fire, and there's nothing much to stop it. So you've got a massive coal fire that's being fed and drawn by the massive, powerful exhaust of the exhaust steam exiting the cylinders. You've got exhaust shooting skyward, cinders probably the size of your fingernail coming out of this thing and falling on the ground and catching things on fire. So we never considered running it on coal. And when people ask me that, I have to bite my tongue, because people have no idea the logistics of a big coal burning locomotive. There's a lot of railroads that do it successfully, but they're not running a big boy around the nation.
Now, we saw it come in last night, and the steam itself is impressive. You head up a team then in Cheyenne that restored this. Give us a brief history of the restoration. It was on static display in California, is my understanding, before UP acquired it back and brought it into the steam shop.
The Union Pacific gave it away in 1961. The Rail Giants Museum, an arm of the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, the Southern California chapter, wrote a letter to the president of the railroad asking to get a big boy. They had heard that they had donated a few, and we would like one. The UP very generously prepared this one. They just pulled it out of what we call the scrap line. It was going to be scrapped. They brought it in the shop, put it back together, the parts that were missing off of it. They put a whistle on it, put the various things on it, gave it a good paint job, and then they hauled it out in a train. They added it to a freight train, and it took quite a while to get out there. 1962 it arrives, and there it sits until we came to ask for it in the year 2012. So the museum has a really fascinating story in itself. And we've got a member of our crew is actually from the museum, Paul Gershio. And he became a member of that organization, and he and others painstakingly cared for this locomotive. They did what they could to just kind of keep it up as much as you can in a static location with a 600-ton locomotive sitting there. It was sitting exactly like this in a paved area with asphalt all the way to the top of the rail, some metal steps up into the cab and some signs around it, cobwebs all over it, pine needles all over it. The paint would fade and they'd repaint it, and they did what they could, put grease in it here and there, had the bell working, had the whistle working, and really were trying to just keep it up. So the day came when we asked them if they could give it back to us. And he tells the story that he was ready to give us the keys right then. So that kind of started a period where we went out and worked on it. We spent several months getting it ready to go because the locomotive hadn't really moved much. They moved it across the parking lot in 1989, but other than that, it was sitting there. So we needed to do a lot of work to it because we were going to take it back to Cheyenne on its wheels. We took a few parts off of it. We had a special train that we sent out to California. We all went out with it, and we brought the locomotive back to Cheyenne in April of 2014. Then we fast forward to 2016. You'll recall when we were here with the 844.
Right.
We had just rebuilt that locomotive to make it good, to make it serviceable so we could continue running that locomotive. That took about 2.5 years of what we would hope was going to be a 5-year timeline to get this locomotive ready. So now we're down to 2.5 years. We've got to get this locomotive ready, and we did that.
And the hard deadline for that was the celebration for the 150th.
That's right. Yeah, there was no way we're going to move the commitment that we had as a once-in-a-lifetime 150th anniversary of the driving of the Golden Spike in Promontory, Utah. And this locomotive and the 844 had a date in Ogden, Utah, and that date wasn't going to move. So we miraculously were able to get the locomotive completed 48 hours before we were due to depart. So if you don't think there was just a little bit of pressure, but we did that, and people will be able to come down and meet Austin, Ted, Kurt, Jimmy, Garland, Troy, Donnie, Paul, Jim Leonard, all of the guys that really, they did the work. And I think that's what's so fascinating about this story is because you can talk all day long, but then you can also get something done. And that's kind of the essence of what you have to do if you're going to do that. And we're very, very blessed and fortunate that the Union Pacific stands behind us. Without that, there's nothing we can do. So with their urging and a little bit of pressure and a tremendous amount of elbow grease, a lot of sleepless nights, and a lot of tremendously hard work, we've completed this big locomotive, and we're just wrapping up the end of what will be a 60-day, 5,000-mile trip departing Cheyenne, Wyoming back on September 27th. And we've traveled a lot of miles. We've been a lot of places where this locomotive was not designed to go. So that means that we've got to be careful in how we analyze where we're going to take the locomotive. It will physically fit. There's some of the bridges that are older. And because those bridges are a little bit older, that means we go a little bit slower. And there's yard tracks that are a little bit tighter. And it's amazing to watch this locomotive go through a tight turn. And we are amazed too. But to be on the locomotive, to feel it, and you actually can feel it as it's moving through the curvature. And just like the 844, you get a feel for that locomotive. And you're comfortable doing things with that locomotive as you're operating it. The same with this locomotive. You feel how the locomotive is moving. And that front engine begins moving into the turn, and then there's a series of springs right over my shoulder here that begin to push and influence the front part of that boiler over. And those springs begin compressing and they begin pushing the boiler over. And then you can feel the engine kind of kick a little bit. And if the curve is really sharp, then we're going to go extremely slow. There is always a chance for derailment. We hate that word. So we've derailed it once, and we don't want to derail it again. So we're just very, very cautious about moving this locomotive into curvature. So we've got plans. Whenever we have to go through a sharp curve, guys will get out, and we'll just ease right through that curve. And the first few times you do it, I still get a little heartburn in the hours leading up to it, but you kind of settle down a little bit because the locomotive is brand new. All the springs are new. All the machine clearances are exactly what they need to be. So it's not sloppy. I mean, this thing is tight. So when it goes into a curve, it's tight. And you got to be really careful about that.
Well, that's a fascinating history and a fascinating explanation. You're going to be here just today in Kansas City, and then are you home for Thanksgiving?
We get home hours before Thanksgiving.
Well, thank you. You've got hundreds of people here. This is a reality TV show in the making, I think. You and your team are so generous with your time. We've got hundreds of thousands of people that'll watch this on Facebook. What would you tell? Look into the camera and tell them to get themselves down here today. This is once in a lifetime.
Well, it's very important, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. The first thing I want to say is to be very careful when you come to see the locomotive. We talk about being 25 feet back, and please trust me when I tell you that you will want to be no closer than 25 feet. You're not going to get a good video. Even the most hardcore, strong, big, strapping farm guys are terrified when this locomotive goes by them. So please come down, check it out. We look forward to seeing everybody. It's a tremendous machine. You won't believe it when you see it for yourself. Come see it for yourself, and I thank you very much. Please be safe along the track.
We're open till 3 o'clock today, so head on down to Union Station. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Mike.